One of the best ways that women can serve their families, serve those they love, continue to do what God has called them to do, is to take care of them.
Yes.
We cannot serve from a place of emptiness. We just can't. We have to refill. And often when we're at that place of emptiness and we're living in survival mode, what comes out of us is not the best version of ourselves. And we feel frustrated and we further shame ourselves or feel the guilt because not only are we exhausted and empty, but then that's coming through to those that we love.
Thank you so much for joining in to today's podcast episode of Empowered in Health. I am so excited to have Rachel Rauch here today. She is a doctor of naturopathy. She's just teaching me exactly how to actually say this word, which is amazing. She's also a certified integrative mental health professional, and she is going to dive in today to talking a little bit more about stress, anxiety, fight or flight, and trauma, and how that really plays a role in our inside out wellness. So Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, of course. I would love to just kind of dive right in and hear more of your heart, your story, and just the work that you do as a doctor, and just really what you've been focused on with serving women's health when it comes to this arena of stress and trauma. So would you share a little bit more, just kind of a top line as far as what you do?
Yes. So I work with women. They come to me because they are dealing with the symptoms of the effects, basically, of ongoing either chronic stress or past trauma, or maybe it's trauma that's currently happening. Sometimes they're very aware and can name it as like, yes, this is trauma. And sometimes it's like, I know that was just very much a normal part of my life. I had no idea that it was having such an impact on me. But what happens is that trauma from the past or that chronic stress they're dealing with now, it keeps their body stuck in fight or flight. And that is what starts a cascade of so many different health concerns.
So many different health concerns. And that's why I wanted to bring you on the podcast today and really pick your brain about this specific topic inside wellness, because like you said, I think women start to identify symptoms, but they don't always know exactly where those symptoms are coming from or why they're happening and how it could potentially be deeply rooted inside trauma that we've carried for years. So Rachel, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about stress and trauma and this idea of being stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. Can you explain a little bit about the physiological response that shows up in the body and why that can contribute to things like all kinds of symptoms, hormonal imbalances, anxiety, poor sleep, etc.?
Sure. So the number one thing that people want to be aware of is that your body is for you. God created our bodies to protect and take care of themselves. Okay. And so if in the past or currently your body is feeling threatened or it doesn't feel safe, that is what's going to initiate and start that fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown. It's an issue of the body is going to do whatever it needs to do. It's going to become extremely hypervigilant in an effort to keep you safe. And that's good. Like if you are lost in the jungle and there's a saber-toothed tiger on the loose out there, you're not going to curl up and take a nap. Because every system that is necessary for survival, every system that is necessary to keep you safe is on very high alert. Okay? So your body's not designed to sleep when you are on high alert. The problem is most of us will never be in a jungle with a loose tiger. But our bodies don't know the difference between trying to get a meal on the table and the kids off to soccer practice on time. It doesn't know the difference between a really scary tiger and a calendar that is overloaded. It creates the same stress response inside of us. And that's the problem, because the body can sustain that short term, like to get away from the tiger, to be safe. But it can't sustain it ongoing day in, day out, week in, week out, so on and so forth for a lot of our life. And so eventually our body says, I can't keep doing this. I need some help. So I am going to send a message through symptoms to try to get your attention that we need to do something about this. And so it will send the message through maybe poor sleep or anxiety or fatigue or hormone issues, irritability. The list just goes on and on.
Yes, goes on and on. And I would love for you to share a little bit about when you have those symptoms crop up. And if you're really working through maybe a stressful time in your life or a busy schedule, or like you said, just feeling overloaded and kind of constantly in that stressed out state, what are the steps that you start to really help women implement to identify that they really are in this fight, flight, or freeze state? And how do they slowly start to work themselves out of it?
I feel that the very first step is just awareness. A lot of us we're in survival mode. We live from one moment to the next moment. It is truly just survival. Okay. And sometimes that's necessary. If we've had a lot of trauma or the chronic stress has left us feeling very unsupported or something of that nature, naturally it's the way that we do survive, but it's not sustainable. And so we want to start first by just becoming aware of what we're feeling. It's like, oh, yeah, I do have pain in my shoulders. Or, that pounding heart, it's actually anxiety that I'm feeling. Well, what am I anxious about? Just becoming aware of what we're feeling in our bodies. A lot of us can be so unaware because it's not necessary for survival in our chronic stress or whatever. So we first start by just becoming aware. I would say number 2, after we become aware of what we're feeling, is to identify any emotions behind what we're feeling, because that plays a huge role in our health as well. And then after that, it will be a little bit dependent on the individual as far as which exact steps we take next. But some of the most important steps is going to be to get the cortisol levels down. Because cortisol, adrenaline, they're close cousins. They're working together in your body. They're very necessary whenever you're trying to escape from that tiger. But our body is producing too much indiscriminately for the rest of the stress that we're dealing with. So we need to lower that cortisol through exercise, through eating more protein so that we can stabilize our blood sugar, through getting enough sleep. But sometimes, even in the situation of all 3 of those I just mentioned, sometimes we have to step back though and say, okay, based on the situation where this person is at, what is realistic? There are people that they have so much cortisol, so much adrenaline in their system that they need to exercise probably a little bit aggressively in order to burn off some of that extra cortisol and adrenaline. Okay. And they're going to feel phenomenal whenever they're done because they have released so much of that out of their body. There are others that are in such a state of exhaustion that if they would aggressively exercise, they are going to feel awful when they're done. So it's not a one size fits all. It's a matter of determining where you at, what stage on the nervous system scale are you at, and what do we need to do to help move you out of that?
I so appreciate you speaking about this because this really kind of explains how important it is for women to grasp that it's not one size fits all. And you speaking very specifically about how you have to really understand your unique situation and how the habits aligned with what's actually going to help you is going to be different. I've learned that firsthand in my own wellness journey. Like I got to a point where I was so stressed to the max, and my cortisol was literally through the roof, all over the place, like just bottomed out in the morning, all the things that me personally, when I would hit a harder workout, I would feel worse. I would feel depleted. I would feel extra exhausted. It wasn't fueling me the way it once did. And that was one of the first signs that I personally went through. And I love that you're speaking about this because it just reminds women that we have to be looking underneath the surface. We have to be paying attention to what is our body really sharing and what is our nervous system essentially feeling, because it absolutely plays a huge role in our inside out wellness. So I super appreciate you sharing that, Rachel. So important.
Yes, I totally agree.
So important. I know you talked a little bit about cortisol, insulin, blood sugar, all of those things. And for me as a health coach, what I really help women understand is when we're going through periods of extra stress, right? When we're in that fight or flight, or our nervous system is shot for some reason, if we're not fueling consistently and we go on blood sugar roller coasters, or if we're not managing our stress well, like that, it essentially adds way more stress to the overarching picture of health. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about, in your experience with the women that you coach and the clients that you have, what are typically the imbalances that you most often uncover, whether that's through testing or whether that's through symptoms? Are there patterns that you most often see?
It is very common for me to see elevated cortisol.
Yeah.
And very depleted levels of neurotransmitters.
Okay.
Like sometimes adrenaline will be high, but often it's actually low. Dopamine can be low, serotonin can be low. And so they have all this cortisol for survival, and yet they're so depleted in all of those endorphin-like substances.
Right.
And so it's this ridiculous but very true pattern of irritability,
Yeah.
exhaustion, poor sleep, anxiety because of that.
Right.
That's probably one of the biggest patterns that I see.
Okay.
I see a lot of patterns with methylation. Whenever I do some DNA testing, definitely we'll see some things there. But I would say those are probably some of the biggest patterns that I'm really looking at.
Yeah.
With individuals.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, especially for women who live busy lives, lots going on.
Yeah. And I would say with blood sugar. So I think it's important for people to understand what's happening with blood sugar when they are under a lot of stress. So like I already mentioned, if you are lost in that jungle with that saber-toothed tiger, your body is going to be primed for survival. So what's going to happen in that moment when the body realizes that there is a life-threatening situation? Everything that is not necessary for survival will shut down.
Yeah.
That means digestion shuts down. That means like everything that is not necessary for survival immediately shuts down.
Yeah.
Okay. And then our bodies move sugar out of the tissue where it's been stored and into the bloodstream, because that sugar is going to give the energy needed to run faster, climb higher, whatever we need to do to get to safety.
Right.
Okay. It's also going to send sugar to the brain, better blood flow to the brain so we can think more clearly. It's going to send more blood flow to the lungs so we can breathe more deeply. But that sugar is activated and ready to go. So now let's consider if this is our day-to-day life. If we're living under a lot of stress and every day our body feels like it needs to be protected from that lion, we are never going to digest food well, which is going to impact blood sugar. And we're going to constantly have sugar in our bloodstream ready to be used. But we're not running, we're not climbing, we're not fighting to use it up. A lot of the blood sugar problems that we see begins with the stress.
Yeah.
And so that type of pattern I'm looking for as well.
Wow. I mean, it's just profound to continue to hear, like, really truly how the body is so interconnected and how something like stress can really play a massive role in how our body functions, how we feel, and how well we can really move through our day-to-days. And so I just appreciate your perspective, Rachel, because it's just incredibly important for women to understand how important this is inside of our wellness puzzle. So I know one of the things you speak about in your programming and in your coaching is how your body speaks through symptoms. And I know you spoke about this a little bit already, but I'd love for you to explain maybe a little bit more. What does that mean? And why is it important for us to really tune into how our body is speaking to us through symptoms?
Sure. So let me give you an example of one symptom that I think is often overlooked as being the body speaking, and that is anxiety. So we can say, well, I have anxiety, or so-and-so has anxiety. All right. And we're referring to what they are experiencing as far as their fear or their inhibition to do something, or something of that nature. Okay. We're talking about how they feel in their body from that. What we most often don't do is to step back and say, why does the body feel the need to be anxious? Sometimes it's blood sugar, okay? It can come from a sense of not being safe. It can come from too much adrenaline and cortisol and not enough of your inhibitory neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA. It can come from things like MSG. If genetically you can't convert glutamate into GABA, which is calming and soothing, MSG is going to make that worse. There are numerous different things that contribute and create a sense of anxiety in our bodies. But most of the time, we don't look at our physical bodies to identify what is contributing. Now, I am not saying that any of those in themselves is the 100% cause of anxiety. It's often a combination of things. So I'm not minimizing the effects of anxiety. But in order for somebody to really address that anxiety, they need to look at what else is going on in the body, because a lot of the communication of the body is going to be through symptoms like that.
Yes. Will you quickly share a little bit more about the MSG component, what MSG is for people that need more of that 101 education so they can understand how choices and stuff like that play a role in things like anxiety?
So MSG is monosodium glutamate. It is a flavor enhancer. You can purchase it by itself under the name Accent. But it is also found in a lot of Chinese foods, or like canned soup, canned seasoning, things of that nature. Now, glutamate. So monosodium glutamate is basically salt and glutamate that has been bonded together. Because salt and glutamate are both natural substances by themselves, it is considered, or it falls under the category of natural seasonings. But when you take sodium and glutamate and bond them together, they are no longer natural. They are now a chemical. So you can have any number of different boxed or canned foods that says natural seasoning on it, and it can contain MSG and not be labeled. So you really want to look for things that say no MSG, because then you know that that has intentionally been removed or withheld or whatever it happens to be. But in your body, glutamate is an incredibly important amino acid. It's used in the gut. It helps with the muscles, the tissue to repair and rebuild. But a portion of glutamate then is also converted into something called GABA. And GABA is one of our primary inhibitory neurotransmitters that helps to soothe and calm us when we're dealing with anxiety or extra stress or things of that nature. If you can't convert that glutamate into GABA properly, because glutamate is actually an excitatory amino acid, so it's going to increase energy, but too much is going to increase anxiety. So if you have a lot of MSG coming in and you can't convert that glutamate properly, it's going to increase your glutamate, it's going to bring down your GABA, and it's a recipe for more anxiety.
More anxiety. Thank you so much for kind of giving more of that snapshot. I mean, I even learned some levels of new things. I really appreciate how you're speaking about everything from our environments, but also to our choices, right? Like how we're really choosing to fuel our bodies, how we're really choosing how to intentionally rest, and what we're doing from an overall wellness standpoint, because really, truly, it is all intertwined. And I love that you teach on that and you speak about the science of it, but you also speak about the symptoms, and then you also speak about the habits. So I'd love to kind of move into talking a little bit more about your program, Wholeness Restored, Rachel. I know that in that program, you're really focused on helping women restore peace and calm in their bodies. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what is your program about, and, are there habits or practices you work through with your clients? Tell me a little more about how you actually support women in this program.
Sure. Thank you. So Wholeness Restored is really intended to provide kind of a method, a step-by-step process for women to go through in their healing journey. It consists of 6 core modules. We focus on diet and nutrition, but I often tell women that there is 1,000 plus influencers out there in social media, all with their idea of some extreme diet that is going to bring about the weight loss or the figure or whatever it is that you're wanting to achieve. But because they're extreme, they are not sustainable. You can't do them for the rest of your life. You shouldn't do them for the rest of your life because it wouldn't be healthy even if you could do them for the rest of your life. My intention is to cut through the noise of all of these extreme fads and provide something that is sustainable, something that we can do day in and day out and still live in a social environment, that all of us are part of. So we focus on diet and nutrition. We focus on cleansing. Up to 90% of our serotonin and 50% of our dopamine is produced in the gut, not in the brain. So if women are dealing with a lack of concentration or forgetfulness or poor motivation, if they're dealing with low mood or anxiety or irritability, rather than just focus on the brain, they really need to start in their gut. So we do some work there, and then we need to rebuild. We need to make sure we've got the core nutrients back in place. We address stress. Very much of an out-of-the-box thinker with stress. Like some stress we can avoid and we have control over, and other stress we can't. So it's a matter of how do we address the stress that we have control over, and how do we manage the stress that we don't have control over. Also address the adrenal glands, cortisol, because hormone problems, almost all of them can be linked back to cortisol. And so that's why often we'll start there first. And then we finish with brain health, like how our thoughts affect the way that we feel. So we go through those 6 core modules, but then I do customize the program. The type of testing and the things that we do is more specifically for the individual, because we aren't all created the same. Our bodies are different. And so we need to look at test results. We need to customize a program according to the test results. And then I do some additional teaching and, just some other community support in the program as well.
That's so wonderful. Like going through all those different facets and the pillars is so wonderful. And I love that you're really building that out for women and the support that you create, because it's such a necessity. Like we talked about, even before we're hitting record today, we talked about just how necessary this level of personalized support, creating sustainable long-term strategies, like looking under the hood and understanding the different levels of inside out wellness and how it's all intertwined. It's so incredibly important for women to understand. And I'm with you as far as seeing some of the things that are marketed out online, the one size fits all quick fix strategies, here's the crash course to get to this physique messaging. It's really, really tricky for women to manage all that noise. And having really dedicated places like you with the program that you're creating to come to and have a trusted resource and here's how we build sustainability is phenomenal. So Rachel, thank you so much for sharing that. One last question before we kind of move into wrap up. I'd love for you to speak to the woman that's listening to this who maybe feels like she can relate to some of the things we're talking about. Maybe it's the symptoms. Maybe it's she doesn't know how to exactly identify why she feels the way she does. And she wants to take some level of step with getting started with help or becoming more self-aware or digging into this process. What would you say to her to encourage her to start to figure out how to move through prioritizing her health?
I think the first thing that I would tell her is, well, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to assume that this person that you just described is probably also dealing with some guilt as far as, well, but if I focus on me, I need to take care of my family and I feel selfish and we don't have the resources for this and on, these the reasoning goes. Okay. And so I want to speak to that first because it starts with a mindset. Mm-hmm. And we all know that whenever we get on a plane, we are instructed that if those oxygen masks come down, we need to put ours on first. And then we help the person beside us. And I remember the very first time I heard that as probably, I don't know how old I was when I flew, a teenager maybe. And I just remember thinking, well, that's selfish. And then it clicked. Oh, well, duh. You can't help the person beside you if you can't breathe.
Right.
And so one of the best ways that women can serve their families, serve those they love, continue to do what God has called them to do, is to take care of them.
Yes.
Start by taking care of them. We cannot serve from a place of emptiness. We just can't. We have to refill. And often when we're at that place of emptiness and we're living in survival mode, what comes out of us is not the best version of ourselves. Right. And we feel frustrated and we further shame ourselves or feel the guilt because not only are we exhausted and empty, but then that's coming through to those that we love.
Yes.
So you can serve your family best by taking care of you first.
By taking care of you first. Such truth, and so important for us to remember as women and as moms, because it's just the truth. We have to be pouring into our own cup too, right? Rachel, I'd love for you to speak to this concept of sharing stories and why that's powerful for women. So one of the things I like to ask my podcast guests is this question around this concept of maternal mental health. That's a very important topic in my mind. It's something that I'm a huge advocate for. I have my own personal mental health story, and I really believe in the power of speaking very authentically about the hidden pieces to wellness that are not always normalized, but really important to share. So I would love your opinion on when it comes to sharing our stories or when it comes to talking about our symptoms or our specific health journey. Why do you feel like that's so important for other women to hear?
Yes, good question. And I really appreciate that focus that you take. Dr. Curt Thompson wrote the book, The Soul of Shame. And he talks in there about the way to overcome and erase shame in the presence of being known by others. And I think that kind of encompasses everything that you're saying. It's when we can share what we're going through. And there are others that are like, yes, I understand. I've been there. Or it's the person that says, oh my word, you too? I didn't know that there was others that dealt with the same thing I did.
Right.
Like being known actually helps to drop some of that fight or flight, that cortisol, and provides a sense of safety that our bodies desperately need in order to heal.
That is so good. What was the name of that author again?
Dr. Curt Thompson.
Dr. Curt Thompson. I'm going to make sure that is linked in the show notes of this podcast because it sounds like a phenomenal book that I want to dive into too. And I love that concept of just being known and how when we're known and we're more vulnerable and sharing our experiences, it just connects us.
Yes.
That's so good, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. Last question, and then we'll wrap things up today. I would love to hear from you personally. What is maybe a favorite mindset mantra, quote, scripture verse, or something that you lean on in your day-to-day that reminds you of the importance of taking care of your health?
I would say that trauma or chronic stress doesn't get the final say in my life, your life, or anyone else's life. We are not defined by what we have gone through or where we are at right now.
Yeah.
Yes, hard things happen, difficult circumstances occur, but that does not define us or dictate remaining where we're at.
Yeah. So good. So good. I would love for you to share a little bit about how people can find you online. If they want to learn more about your Wholeness Restored program, if they want to connect with you online, where can they find you and connect more?
So you can find me at arrowwellness.com, and arrow is spelled E-I-R-O. It's actually an old archaic Greek word that means God's gift of wholeness.
That's so awesome.
So Aero Wellness, EIRO wellness.com. You can find out more about the Wholeness Restored program there. You can also schedule a free 45-minute introductory call. So if somebody has questions, if they would like to just figure out, is this a good fit? My goal in those calls is not to pressure someone into something. It's not to talk them into something that's not a good fit. It's to help them figure out, is this a good fit, or is there something that would be a better choice for them? You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook under Aero Wellness as well.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you so much for your incredible insight, for your time today, for your perspective, for your encouragement. I have no doubt this episode is going to bless so many women that tune in and listen. Cannot thank you enough for being here. Thanks again for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Take care, Rachel.